Welcome into the Week 3 matchup previews, where Jeff Bell and I go through all the injury news and notes from every single matchup around the NFL. And Jeff, we had a game last night. Your Buffalo Bills, little scared for a minute there, maybe around halftime when they tied it up in the third quarter. I'm sure you're sweating a little bit, but as expected, the Bills walk away with their third win. How are you feeling this morning?
Feeling very good. You're right. It was a little bit more of an unexpected sweat than I had going into it. My daughter is a Dolphins fan, and we make a bet every single time they play. She now has to clean her room because she lost the bet. She doesn't understand point spreads, so she was willing to take it straight up. And, it was, she wanted
Oh
a bag of,
man.
a bag of mints, and I told her she had to clean her room if she lost, and so she was game for that. So she's got to clean her room. The Dolphins have lost, and really, I think the biggest takeaway probably for the Bill side is seeing James Cook continue in a feature back role now that they've signed that contract. They've really pushed him into that type of role. We see him running back one through the first two games, seeing the ball spread out otherwise within that offense. That's more of what we saw last year, and that big game coming out of week one against the Ravens in that comeback effort. The passing volume might not necessarily be there to support other pieces, but at the same time, with Josh Allen, a touchdown is in play for anybody. If you started Dalton Kincaid last night, you've got to be pretty happy with that. Khalil Shakir got you there. And then on the Dolphins side, I think seeing the involvement of Ollie Gordon there a little bit. I mean, the totals weren't exactly great, but he did get that short touchdown. And then also Tyreek Hill looked like Tyreek Hill, and that was good. Seeing Jalen Waddle get a touchdown coming in questionable off the injury. So if you play those Dolphins receivers, you have to be happy about your week as well.
Yeah, and looking through my matchups this morning, I've got one team where I've got Josh Allen, Khalil Shakir, James Cook, and Dalton Kincaid, so feeling pretty good about that one. I just can't get over the fact that books are out here giving 11 and a half points to the Miami Dolphins, and you can't even give half a point to your daughter. But we'll talk about that another time. Let's go ahead and dive in, though. We've got a lot of matchups to discuss here. 15, as there are no bye weeks, and one game has already played. Green Bay Packers at Cleveland Browns. Josh Jacobs is dealing with an ankle injury, but he's been practicing in a limited fashion. No concern there about him. Tucker Kraft, however, did not practice on Thursday. Limited practice on Thursday. They're saying that he avoided a major injury, but as it stands right now, we're recording this at 8 a.m. Eastern on Friday morning. We don't have a lot of information here, Jeff, so I don't know what we're supposed to do. Like, the immediate reaction was Tucker Kraft goes down with a knee injury. Everybody panics. Then they say test results came back okay, and they don't think it's going to be long-term. Does that mean it was just like a little tweak and he's going to be back at practice today? Does that mean he's going to miss 3 weeks instead of the rest of the season? I don't know. So, like, we've got to talk about this, but I don't even know what advice we can give right now besides, like, wait to see what happens later today.
Yeah, make sure you have a backup option, I think, is the biggest one. If you're in deep leagues and Luke Musgrave is available, I would add Luke Musgrave because anything is in play there. But it's a 1 o'clock game, so that gives you some leeway, some breathing time. I feel like it's so often these things happen on Monday night, it seems like. And so we do luck out getting a 1 p.m. game. I do think that Luke Musgrave is probably a plug and play option if Tucker Kraft is announced out, because of having Jalen Reed out, having kind of diminished
Kraft.
targets throughout the rest of the offense.
Exactly. And then Jordan Love also, we're going to talk about these players for anyone new to this show, like the guys that are even practicing in full, because you might be opening up your fantasy football app and you see a Q next to a player's name and you're panicking about it. Jordan Love, he's dealing with a thumb issue, but he's practicing in full. There's no indication that he's not going to be ready to play. So no cause for concern there. And then Jaden Reed, of course, underwent surgery on both his foot and his shoulder. So we knew that it was a broken collarbone, but then while he was under, they also repaired the Jones fracture in his foot. So we don't have an exact timetable for return. Our Adam Hutchinson said somewhere between 3 to 4 weeks. This could be potentially season ending. We don't really know what to expect here, but Jaden Reed in redraft formats is droppable at this point. In dynasty leagues, if you're rebuilding, he might be a target, but probably can't anticipate much production from him this year. And then on the Brown side of the football, everybody's healthy. So that's good to see here. Anything that you're watching, especially in this matchup, Jeff, or maybe with the Browns specifically?
I think both of these teams would be fine with this game being lower scoring. Their defenses are the strengths here. I mean, the Packers have shown the ability to have explosive plays, and the Browns have done a decent job of limiting explosive plays, considering they've played the Bengals and the Ravens. I think from the Browns side, the backfield, seeing how the backfield continues to develop, we had talked about on our Dynasty show a couple weeks ago last week when we did the backfield breakdown, and we'd mentioned that James Ford or Jerome Ford had led the team in snaps in week 1. That happened in week 2 as well. And so while everybody is watching the return of Quinshon Judkins, expecting Dylan Sampson to split time as the pass catching back there, it's really been Jerome Ford in that role as the pass catching back. Sampson, if you're a box score type of a person and you didn't see the game last week, Sampson had some involvement, but it's very late. You cannot put him into a lineup. If this game is close at all, he's not going to be involved early unless something changes relative to what we saw last week. And I think it's just a difficult matchup for your Browns in general. Like maybe you feel comfortable with Harold Fannin, maybe in a pinch, Quinshon Judkins. Maybe you're going to go there with Jerry Jeudy. But what we've seen so far, this Packers defense is a very much a stay away.
So you say maybe with Quinshon Judkins. I'll push back on that a little bit. I talked about him as my start of the week and not like you got to get this guy in. He's an RB1. That's not how I really talk about fantasy football, but I've got him just outside of my top 24. So I've got him like in flex consideration. And I think a lot of people are going to get scared off by the matchup, but he just looks so good. And I think the one thing that I get especially excited about when you look at who the Packers have played over the first couple of weeks, there's a lot of outside runners. And when you've got Micah Parsons and Rashawn Gary on the edges, it's really tough to get outside. Quinshon Judkins is much more of a between the tackles type of runner, and that's where their weakness is on that defensive line, is in the interior. So I'm not expecting, a 200-yard, 2-touchdown game by any means, but he clearly looks like the best guy. They gave him more carries in his first game with the team than any other running back. So I think that just volume based alone, we're going to be looking at like 18 plus touches. And well, I don't think that he is going to absolutely feast. I think that there's going to be volume, and I think that he is a good enough runner to get something going against this defense. So I think, like 60 yards and a touchdown, 80 yards and a touchdown, well within his range of outcomes. So I'm not like pounding the table saying you need to get him in your lineup, but for people who do have pause, I think that he still makes for a decent flex play.
We need to just had the genesis of an idea of like a board bet here where maybe some of these players that we don't differ often, but I feel like when we do differ a little bit, like we give me like half PPR points, 11 points for Judkins.
That's about exactly where I've got him ranked. Yeah, I mean, as
okay.
that's about what I'm expecting.
And over and under at 11 points, you're comfortable with that? And you want to do like 10.8 points?
Yeah, let's do 10.8 points. Yeah, and we'll readjust this. I'm writing it down right now. 10.8 points for Judkins in half PPR. I think the big saving grace, of course, would be if he's able to plunge it into the end zone and really pay off. But we'll see how this one plays out. Indianapolis Colts at Tennessee Titans. The Colts have been red hot. They are facing a pretty good Tennessee defense here, so we'll see how this one pans out. Josh Downs did not practice Wednesday, but was a full participant on Thursday, dealing with a little ankle injury, but it sounds like he'll be ready to go. Tyler Warren didn't practice on Wednesday. He was a limited participant on Thursday. So, we talk about these practice participations because it helps us get an idea of the trajectory. So when somebody doesn't practice Wednesday, limited on Thursday, that probably means that they're going to play, but we want to see what they do on Friday, of course. And then on the Titans side of the ball, everybody's healthy there. So good news. And we're going to get a lot of that at this point in the season where it's just, hey, everybody that you care about that's fantasy relevant is healthy on this team right now. That obviously changes as we get deeper into the season. So Jeff, I wrote about it in my rest of season rankings article this week, kind of making the comparison to Daniel Jones this year and Derek Carr last year. I don't know if it's assuredly going to happen where they just fall off a cliff after 2 weeks. That being said, I understand why some people are looking at what Daniel Jones has done through these first couple of weeks, the QB2 in fantasy scoring, and getting a little bit scared off. But when I'm ranking this and I'm looking at the different options here, I've got Daniel Jones ranked well ahead of a lot of people that were drafted to be starting quarterbacks in fantasy.
Well, Daniel Jones I understand the Saints comparisons and their natural parallel because the way that the unexpected production and the way the Saints fell off. But what the Saints were doing last year was unsustainable in terms of their deep pass success rate. And what the Colts are doing is asking Daniel Jones, just don't screw it up. And very much like how Shane Steichen coming from the Eagles basically got to a point last year where they told Jalen Hurts, don't screw it up. And I think that's where I think there's a little bit more sustainability in terms of like, I just see we're very far off in terms of talent between the Eagles last year. But to me, the Colts feel more like the parallel to the Eagles last year, where they've just got a quarterback in there that can be competent and not screw the game up. And they can lean on their stud running back. They've got playmakers around. And so let Jones just make the easy throw. We'll shove you into the end zone occasionally, and getting the fantasy production that way. And so that's where it feels a little bit more sustainable to me than the Saints model last year. And that's what they're going to be asked to do here. But I think from the Colts side, you're going to play your options. And Michael Pittman, I think, is a little bit of an under the radar option. We saw a very strong week 1. Then he ran into Patrick Surtain in week 2. And so I think that seeing a bounce back from him might be a good one here. And then on the Titans side, I got a chance to watch Cam Ward a little bit. Cam Ward is doing some very fun things that there's not 10 quarterbacks in the league that are trying and pulling off the things that Cam Ward is doing. And so that's great to see. Alec Aomanor has looked very,
like
very
a
strong.
5-year vet. That's what when I watch Cam Ward, he doesn't look like a guy, you see it so often. These young rookies are just like overwhelmed at the change of speed and power at the NFL. And Cam Ward just isn't playing like that. Like, he looks settled and comfortable. It looks like he's been doing this for 5 years already.
Yeah, and you look at he's done it against the Broncos and the Rams, and I think those are two of the arguably the top 5 defenses in the NFL. And so doing that here, I think this might be shake free a little bit of an under the radar back and forth game potentially in the AFC South. Some fantasy goodness here. Tony Pollard, there's 2 backs in the league that are taking pretty much 100% of the opportunities in their backfield. It's Tony Pollard and it's Chase Brown. Tony Pollard's running back 29 right now. Chase Brown's running back 25. That feels like one of those early season things that is going to flip. And I just don't see how a running back can have 100% of the opportunity in their backfield and be running back 29 over the course of the season.
Yeah, and I think the fear, of course, is that Tajay Spears comes back at some point. But like for right now, you got to put Tony Pollard in your lineup with confidence. And then I want to go back real quickly to Daniel Jones, because I know there's a lot of start-sit questions on Daniel Jones. Jeff, I don't know if you've got your rankings pulled up right now, but I've got him at my QB 12 on the week. So Jared Goff on the road against Baltimore. I prefer Daniel Jones there. Bo Nix on the road against the Chargers. I prefer Daniel Jones there. Of course, Jake Browning, Mac Jones, Michael Penix, Russell Wilson. I mean, I'm starting Daniel Jones pretty aggressively in a lot of leagues this week. Are you there as well, or do you think that maybe I'm eating the cheese?
I'm at quarterback 7 this week, Dave.
Oh, wow.
Pretty aggressive.
Yeah,
here this week.
Yeah, I can't get him ahead of Jordan Love, Kyler Murray, Baker Mayfield, Caleb Williams, but definitely in that same tier. So I understand where you're at. I mean, what we've seen is like at the dismay of Jonathan Taylor drafters is they're just going to shove Daniel Jones into the end zone the same way that we've seen them doing in Philadelphia for the last couple of years. So that definitely gives him a high floor and a ceiling if that sort of usage maintains. Let's move on. Cincinnati Bengals at my Minnesota Vikings. Joe Burrow is going to undergo surgery likely later today on Friday. It sounds like he's going to miss likely 3 to 4 months. They said they aren't closing the door for a potential return, that he might be able to return late in the year. But until then, Jake Browning is going to start for the Bengals. Jeff, we need to spend some time talking about this. I'm not overly concerned. I've seen a lot of panic when people talk about the fact that Jamar Chase was a wide receiver too when he played with Jake Browning in 2023. That just throws all context out the window. The second game that they played together, he went 11 receptions on 12 targets, 149 yards and a touchdown. And then he had a quiet week after that. And then he got hurt, and then he was inactive, and then he was limited for the next 2 games as they closed out the season. I think there's a lot of overreactions to the Jamar Chase splits that don't really take the context into consideration. The reality is we saw one game where he was a wide receiver 2 and one where he was an elite wide receiver 1. And that's kind of what I'm expecting as he's playing with Jake Browning.
Yeah, it shocks me that there would be overreactions about anything this, early in the season. I'm not seeing overreactions.
In today's world?
It is everywhere. It is absolutely insane. The overreactions to overreactions. We had talked about it last night a little bit on the Audible Live with Matt Waldman and myself and our guest Josh Falsing, but we dove in and we talked about the rookie overreactions. And I think Matt and I talked about how so many of the rookies, they've been talked about all summer long, but then for a lot of people, this is their first time actually watching them and then seeing them and talking about how Ashton Genty looks small, and Ashton Genty's the same size that he was when he played against Penn State. So I don't know, like some of these things it's obvious that people have talked about players and then actually watched them for the first time when the lights came on. But when I look at Jamar Chase, it's a little bit of a like the Batman when Alfred's talking to the guy that wants to blackmail Batman and he's basically saying, so you think my client is somebody that goes out in the night and is a vigilante and has all these things, and this is a person that you want to trifle with? Like, I feel like that's how I feel with Jamar Chase. Of like, if you're going to fade Jamar Chase, it's like we know this is the Triple Crown winner who had a big game in the second half of last week with Jake Browning, and you want to fade this man? And so no, I'm definitely not fading Jamar Chase. I think he's going to be okay. I think that Jake Browning brings a level of quarterback play that can sustain the options, and maybe we see just a more diluted attack, because we saw involvement from the tight ends from Joe Burrow. We saw last week Andre Yoshivas got involved a little bit. If you just distill those targets down to Jamar Chase and T. Higgins, and maybe you get Chase Brown out of the backfield occasionally with Jake Browning, then that can still be really, really good for fantasy. And it's interesting, this matchup here, because we have the teammates Jamar Chase and Justin Jefferson from LSU, and I'm pretty certain the last time they played, we ended up getting a Jake Browning and Nick Mullins game. And so it's like the type of thing of like, these two guys are going to be linked together because of what they did at LSU, but then every time that they play each other, we haven't gotten the full arsenal of all the things they could do.
Yeah, and I think, Jake Browning, for whatever his shortcomings are, like he's going to lock in on Jamar Chase. And I've bumped T. Higgins down a few ticks in my rest of season rankings, but still holding Jamar Chase down as the overall wide receiver one. What I'm going to be paying close attention to is Chase Brown, whether he is still getting targeted out of the backfield. We know that a lot of his value last year came from being the receiving back as well. I don't know if Jake Browning is the mature quarterback the way that Joe Burrow is, that'll get through his get through his progressions and then check down if it's not there. I think Jake Browning is more the type to just like, I'm just going to force the ball to Jamar Chase and hope he can make a play. So we'll see if Chase Brown's usage in the receiving game remains. But let's talk about the Minnesota Vikings. This is another one. JJ McCarthy dealing with the ankle injury. They haven't officially declared him out yet, but they said that he's expected to miss 2 to 4 weeks. So we assume that Carson Wentz is going to be the starter in this matchup. Aaron Jones, dealing with a hamstring injury, was placed on IR. And then the Vikings brought in a very familiar face, Cam Akers. It feels like this is the 40th time that Cam Akers has signed with the Vikings in the last 3 years. But Jeff, any major takeaways here? I said this on a show yesterday with Jeff Blaylock, and maybe I'm being a little bit crazy here, but I almost have more faith in the Vikings receiving options with Carson Wentz than I did with JJ McCarthy. Is that crazy?
After what we saw last week, I don't think it's crazy. I don't think that anybody had that game against the Falcons being such a low scoring, just run it out type of a game. You see those two teams matching up in prime time. You're expecting some fireworks coming out of that. And so we didn't get any at all. I think Wentz, it's a big spot for him. It's a fun spot. He grew up a Vikings fan and kind of looked like maybe he was headed out of the league. And now in week 3, he finds himself in an opportunity to really put maybe a last chapter on his career. I think that the Minnesota backfield, everybody's very excited about Jordan Mason. Xavier Scott is a name that I'll keep an eye on because he's a converted college wide receiver. He's a bigger guy, undrafted free agent, made the team. And they brought in Akers, but at the same time, Scott's been there for the last 2 months through the entire offseason program. And so maybe we see him get some receiving usage out of the backfield and split that time a little bit with Mason. I don't know if it's just the expectations about this Bengals defense it's interesting to me. Obviously, we saw the Jaguars move the ball on them week 1. They played the Browns, but I mean, Joe Flacco got there on yards, but they weren't there on scores. So is this defense better? Is it still the atrocious Bengals defense? Are they going to get gashed by Justin Jefferson, some of these big plays? And I think for the Vikings as well, one more game before they get to plug Jordan Addison back into that receiver rotation.
Yeah, I am interested, especially in Xavier Scott. I mean, he's a guy that I picked up in a bunch of leagues, just kind of taking a wait and see approach here, because for everything that Jordan Mason does really well, he's not the best pass catcher. And like you said, Xavier Scott being this converted wide receiver, really interested to see how he's used, because we have seen in Kevin O'Connell offenses, whether it was Dalvin Cook at the end of his career or Aaron Jones over the last couple of years, he really likes these downfield routes from his running backs. And like we just saw it last week, Aaron Jones getting like deep downfield and catching these wheel routes. And I wonder if Xavier Scott can just take that role. I think that Jordan Mason is going to be the hammer. He's going to get the majority of the carries. carries, but if they can put Scott, a converted wide receiver, in there to run some of these downfield routes out of the backfield, could be a really intriguing play over the next month, especially when the schedule gets much tougher after these next 2 weeks. Let's talk about the Pittsburgh Steelers going to Foxborough to play against the Patriots. We've got DK Metcalf getting a rest day on Thursday, but no concerns there. Don't freak out if you see a Q next to his name in your app. And then all of the Patriots players are healthy, so it's a pretty clean week. Everybody that we care about in fantasy is going to be healthy in this matchup. So what are you going to be watching in this one, Jeff?
Really, I mean, I want to see Christian Gonzalez is supposed to be coming back, so that kind of plays against DK Metcalf a little bit. We haven't seen DK Metcalf step in, as my hope was to see like an extension of Devontae Adams type relationship with Aaron Rodgers. We haven't seen that at all, and both of these offensive coordinators are completely fine spreading the ball around to their entire offense. And I don't think on either side, I mean, we saw the big week one from Kayshon Boutte, but it doesn't seem like there's a reliable fantasy receiving option on either side here. And maybe it's just kind of I do feel like the quarterbacks from what we've seen from these defenses have the opportunity to have a good game here, but you're probably Jaylen Warren and Ramondre Stevenson, the big plays here, the running backs out of those backfields. Whether or not Travion Henderson can bounce back and see involvement and take off, or is he in the doghouse now after the poor performance last week? I think that's one of the biggest things to watch and to take away.
So back to DK Metcalf real quickly. Are you like starting to panic here at all? Just because we know Aaron Rodgers, so much of what he cares about is trust with his receivers, and we've seen some bad drops from DK Metcalf. Do you think that this is one of those things like, I don't want to overreact after a couple of weeks. We know we don't want to do that, but these were the exact concerns I had in the offseason, that like DK Metcalf doesn't have the best hands, that he isn't really a timing receiver. He's more of like a just catch the ball and go after the catch. And I thought it was kind of like an oil and water pairing between these two guys. And now what we've seen through the first couple of weeks is that it doesn't look like the chemistry is there. And we've seen the drops. And I almost wonder if Aaron Rodgers is just going to kind of be Aaron Rodgers and just say, okay, like I'm done with you. We're getting the ball to Calvin Austin and Pat Freiermuth and Jonnu Smith and the guys who have been doing what they're supposed to do. Am I just kind of double counting my preseason priors? Am I overreacting, or do you think I might be onto something here, Jeff?
Well, he's had some drops, but then at the same time, he had a couple great catches last week on
that touchdown
ball that he went
amazing.
up to get over Woolen to set them up before the touchdown, and then the touchdown as well. So he has come through in some big moments. I think that they need who's going to step forward in that. When I think about the Aaron Rodgers offense, I think about the RPO heavy, just that quick out to Devontae Adams, allow him to create. I feel like that's such a crucial part of Rodgers' offense off that RPO action. And we know DK Metcalf had a drop in that situation. Is DK Metcalf going to come into there because he's a big dude, get him out on the perimeter with just a corner to beat and a blocker? There can be some trouble there. Is it going to be Jonnu Smith that plays into Jonnu Smith's skill set potentially? Is that going to be the guy that steps in? To me, that's the missing piece kind of here for Aaron Rodgers to get him really rolling within this offense. And I mean, I'm not panicked yet on DK Metcalf, but boy, I am not feeling as good as I did coming into the year.
Yeah, that's kind of where I'm at as well. Let's move on to the Los Angeles Rams.
Real quick, on the Patriots side, Demario Douglas has been a big disappointment. We've seen him, all the talk about can't guard him in a phone booth and locking down the slot roll. I just haven't seen anything out of him in this season. And so just kind of spreading out the options there. It's going to be, does somebody step up for the Patriots?
Yeah, I went back and I watched the film, and like I don't even think that Demario Douglas looks bad. Like he still has that twitched up, really good route runner. He's separating. It just seems like so often like he's not even one of the first or second reads. Like you just see the ball going to Boutte and Diggs and Hunter Henry or Drake May taking off and running with it before he's even looking Demario Douglas's way. So I don't know if he's like in the doghouse right now. I don't know what's going on, but like he looks good to me on film. It just seems like he's kind of an afterthought in the in the progression. So you want to talk about panic, definitely not panicking about DK Metcalf, but starting to panic a little bit on Demario Douglas. Los Angeles Rams at Philadelphia Eagles, 2-2-0 teams. Really excited about this one here. Devontae Adams got a rest day on Wednesday, limited on Thursday, but this is just veteran treatment. Nothing that we're worried about here. Dallas Goedert has been limited throughout the week with a knee injury, but it seems like he might be trending to play. We'll get a clearer picture on that after Friday's practice. Will Shipley dealing with an oblique injury, didn't practice Wednesday, but was able to log a limited practice on Thursday. So again, probably not expecting to see Shipley out there, but trending in the right direction. We knew he was going to miss some time with these broken ribs, and that's more of a pain tolerance issue than anything else. But Jeff, anything you want to talk about here? I think the main storyline to talk about, not injury related, is just Kyren Williams. We saw last week Blake Corum came in late in the game, looked good with his opportunities, was able to punch in a touchdown. And after the game, they asked Sean Payton about that usage. And he said, yeah, that 70-30 split, that's kind of aligns with the philosophy of what we want to do going forward. So I see people panicking about Kyren Williams now. He got vultured by Blake Corum. Sean McVay said that he wants to see a split backfield. Now he goes on the road to Philadelphia. Are you starting to get a little bit nervous about Kyren Williams here? Or do you think that this is just everybody overreacting and Kyren Williams is going to do what Kyren Williams does this week?
They've been talking about splitting this backfield for years, and they don't. And then last year, the Kyren Williams, the punt returner experiment, because the other backs look so good, that Kyren Williams had 2 punt returns last year. And so sure, maybe, but again, this is something that they've been talking about. Corum did have a strong camp, but so much of his involvement, that game was out of hand by the time that he was being involved. So I think that that's another instance of, if you're looking at the box score and you're looking at the narrative and you're grabbing the coach speak, but then when you actually watch the game, you're like, well, this game was over before they got Corum involved, and he had a touchdown like when the game was already over with 6 minutes left and they're up by multiple scores already. So I'm not all the way there on panic streets on Kyren Williams. I do think it's funny because it's like, you see excitement like Blake Corum's happening. It's happening. And it's like, Blake Corum's not happening. It's just making Kyren Williams worse. But no, it's they've talked about this. Let's see it actually come to fruition in the plan. We saw stretches last year where Kyren Williams gets 2 series, Blake Corum comes in for 1 series, back and forth like that. I mean, I think that you're still, some of this was baked into Kyren Williams' price at the beginning of the year, and that's
he was like a late 3rd round pick, and
right.
So it's not like you paid up for Kyren Williams at the end of the 1st round, and now you're panicking. Like, it was kind of expected that maybe we'd see a little bit of Blake Corum, but I'll ask you one more, Jeff. In the theme of overreacting after the first couple of weeks here, I'll ask you the same question that I asked Jeff Blaylock on a show yesterday. Can't believe I'm asking this, but AJ Brown in this same matchup, do you think he might be benchable? Like, where are you at with AJ Brown? I don't know where you've got him in your rankings. I've got him at the kind of wide receiver 2, wide receiver 3 bubble. So I'm not saying that like he's a must bench by any means, but there's a lot of players that you drafted rounds behind AJ Brown that I would, say maybe you can start ahead of AJ Brown going into this week.
Yeah, I'm in a very similar range with you. I had him as going into the Sunday Morning Live show last week, I had him as my wide receiver 31. I allowed my great and intelligent co-host, Adam Hutchinson, had played him as his start of the week. And so that got me a little bit pumped. I bumped him up a little bit, but I think I'm going to stay down in this week. For me, I think the biggest takeaway is the Eagles are fine playing the way that they're playing. They're not.
Right. If it ain't broke, don't fix it.
If it ain't broke, don't fix it. And there's a lot of panic in the streets about how like fantasy Twitter seems to think that the Eagles and the Bills are the 2 most broken offenses because they're not just throwing the ball to one receiver. And meanwhile, they're the 2 best teams in football. So I think there's something interesting there. And I do want to mention on the Rams, they called me crazy, but Devontae Adams, 21 targets, Puka Nacua, 20 targets. So there we go.
I mean, thank you for that poll. I drafted Devontae Adams in just about every single league that meant something to me this offseason. So feeling pretty good about that week 2 involvement, and hoping that's a sign of things to come after we saw a pretty disappointing week 1. New York Jets going to Tampa Bay to play against the Buccaneers. Emeka Egbuka has not practiced this week. He's dealing with a hip and groin injury. Chris Godwin, however, is back at practice. He has been playing in a limited fashion. Probably not going to play this week, but they said they're pretty hopeful that he can be back on the field for week 4. Baker Mayfield practicing in full with a foot and a toe injury. But I think really, the lead's buried. We don't talk a ton about every single offensive lineman that's hurt, but Tampa Bay, their offensive line is absolutely decimated going into this matchup. They've lost Tristan Wirfs, still is going to be out there. And and who's the other one? Cody Mock. They
Yeah.
lost him as well. So, a lot of concerns about the offensive line here, but do you have any concerns about the Tampa Bay offense as a whole? It seems like this was the same thing last year. Like they were running red hot, and every single week they would suffer a catastrophic injury, and we'd say, well, this is going to be the end of that hot streak for Tampa Bay. And then they would do it, and then they'd lose another player to injury, and we'd say, well, that's going to be the end. And then they'd do it again. And like it feels like we're just repeating the same season here with Tampa Bay. I'm just kind of at the point where I'm just going to say, I'm not going to count out Tampa Bay. Like they find ways to make it work.
No, I'm not counting out Baker Mayfield. I think at this point, I think one of the things I saw that I really enjoyed was he had that run on that final drive, and it looked like he was hurt. And then I saw somebody say Baker remembered that talking trash is his antidote, because he got up and it looked like he was hurt, and then he saw C.J. Gardner-Johnson standing there, and he was like, "No, I'm gonna bring it. I'm like, let's go." And it's like he's fine. Like then at that point,
That was I don't know if there's like a better 2 seconds that like can better portray Baker Mayfield. Like literally like holding his knee, like rolling around in pain. Like when I saw that happen, I was like, what did ACL, knee dislocation? Like what happened here? And then he looks up, sees CJ there, and just pops up and immediately gets in his face. And that is, fine. Yeah, I love Baker Mayfield. Might be my favorite quarterback in football right now.
yeah, I mean, from Ibuka, the injury is definitely concerning, whether he's going to be out there or not. And I think overall, he's had the touchdowns, which has been fantastic. But I think that's also masked. He had 29 yards last week, and so it's
Right.
like a lot of it's happening with Ibuka, and we're seeing the big plays translate. But overall, I mean, he doesn't seem to have he's going to be out there every snap, but it feels a lot like Jalen McMillan last year towards the end of the year, where he'd get in the end zone once or twice, but then the overall yardage isn't necessarily there. And so you feel a little bit worried about starting him when you dig into it, except for the hype has been so much that nobody's worried about starting Emeka Ibuka right now. It feels like, absent the injury. I think the biggest takeaway for the Bucs,
Yeah, if he doesn't have 3 touchdowns and we're looking just at the production, people would be panicking about Ibuka the same way they're panicking about every other rookie.
Yeah. Matthew Golden's like full blown panic, but Emeka Ibuka is to the moon because he's got 3 touchdowns. But some of it is I pushed back last year talking about Mark Andrews, the panic, and it's like, well, he's got like 9 touchdowns, so I mean he's still tight end 5 like type thing. So your touchdowns count for a lot of fantasy points, so he's still getting there. The backfield, I think last week, seeing how good Rachaad White looked in a change of pace role, and meanwhile the efficiency was down on Bucky Irving, but that's another one that if you just look at the box score, Bucky Irving got there, but so much of it came on that final 2-minute drive where they just dumped it underneath the defense playing prevent defense, and that got Irving up to a yardage in the receiving, got him the PPR points. Before that, it was a little bit of a disappointing game for Irving, not getting into the end zone there, and then White getting into the end zone at the very end of the game. I think they're fine playing like a 60-40 split or 70-30 type split, 65-35 type split, where Rachaad White's going to play, and he looks really good. And it's just something we've talked about before, when you've got the primary back and the efficiency is down because he's beating it between the tackles, and then you bring in the change of pace and he's running into open boxes, and that's very much what we saw there.
Yeah, and I think Rachaad White also earned some extra touches, kind of sacrificing his body, going after that loose ball in a very pivotal moment. That's stuff the coaches really like. Justin Fields, dealing with a concussion, did not practice, will not play this week. We don't know about week 4 yet. We'll cross that bridge when we get to it. But for week 3, at least, Tyrod Taylor is going to start. They're also down Josh Reynolds. He's dealing with a hamstring injury, has not practiced yet this week. Doesn't seem like he's going to play as well. Jeff, I think I kind of have the same take with you when it comes to Garrett Wilson and the pass catchers here. I think a lot of people just say like, oh, no, Justin Fields, this is great for Garrett Wilson. I'm a little bit concerned here. I think Tyrod Taylor might be a better quarterback, but I think with Justin Fields, you at least knew that he was going to force the ball to Garrett Wilson. I don't know if we're going to be looking at that same treatment with Tyrod Taylor out there.
Exactly. No worries about forcing the ball to Garrett Wilson, his college teammate. So yeah, if the passing volume doesn't feel like it's going to be there for the Jets. And so if Garrett Wilson's not pulling literally every single target, that makes Garrett Wilson more of a tougher start. Tyler Johnson played every snap last week with Josh Reynolds being out, had 1 target, no catches, and that like sums up the Jets passing attack. The wide receiver 2 plays every snap, has 1 target, no catches, and really, I mean, you're still probably playing Garrett Wilson. They'd probably have to get into some difficult situations to actually bench him at this point, and then Breece Hall. But other than that, there's just nothing else in this Jets offense.
Yeah, I've still got Garrett Wilson as my wide receiver 12 on the week. This is a guy who's accounted for 30% of the air yard, or I'm sorry, over 50% of the air yards for the New York Jets so far, third most among any wide receiver, behind just Malik Neighbors, Jackson Smith-Njigba. So those are pretty good metrics to pay attention to. Las Vegas Raiders playing against the Washington Commanders. We've got Brock Bowers still dealing with this knee injury. He's been limited in practice. We saw last week he did not look like himself out there, but still gave it a go and like to see that. Noah Brown hasn't practiced with a groin and a knee injury. Jaden Daniels also has yet to practice this week, dealing with a knee injury himself. Jeremy McNichols dealing with a hamstring injury, but he was a full participant on Thursday, so no concerns there. And then Deebo Samuel got a day off with a personal issue, but nothing serious there. I think the major issue that we need to talk about here is Jaden Daniels, because it sounds like we haven't heard officially yet. And correct me if I'm wrong, Jeff. We haven't officially heard that Jaden Daniels isn't going to play. It sure seems like he's trending in that direction, in which case Marcus Mariota would be in line for the start. And the difference between Jaden Daniels and Marcus Mariota, that is just a huge chasm there. We talk about how some of these other backups, we aren't overly concerned about the pass catchers there. I'd be much more concerned about the pass catchers in Washington if we get a Marcus Mariota start.
Yeah, a revenge spot for Marcus Mariota. Spent 2020 and 2021 with the Raiders. And so if he does get the start here going up against his former team, I think starting with the Raiders side, I know there's some concern with Ashton Genty. I don't know. I think that when you really look at that, I'm not super concerned with
He's
Ashton
looked
Genty.
awesome.
Yeah, he's had he's running into stack boxes, had a tough time getting anything before the yards before contact type of yards before the line of scrimmage type thing has been a real struggle for him. But at the same time, like Dylan Lobby is a little bit interesting to me because Chip Kelly had Darren Sproles in Philadelphia, and if you remember those teams, it was LaShawn McCoy and Darren Sproles in that backfield, and I think that there could be some interesting parallels there with Genty in the LaShawn McCoy role, and then kind of Lobby in the Sproles role. And so fun to see Dylan Lobby because it felt like he was written off for dead after his rookie season. From the Washington side, I think Deebo Samuel is the really interesting play here because losing Austin Eckler, having maybe the backup quarterback in there, giving him the ball in situations to allow Deebo Samuel to create, but also making life easier for Marcus Mariota. I'm curious one more touch on the Raiders, but where you got Jacoby Myers in your rankings, because I think that there's definitely a rapport there with Geno Smith
ahead of AJ Brown, who we just talked about not too long ago.
Yeah. So you're pretty happy right now. If you've drafted Jacoby Myers, you're disappointed with other pieces from the Raiders, and then the Washington side should be Krosky Merritt as the lead back there. But is Deebo Samuel going to be that complimentary back? Is it going to be Jeremy McNichols? What's going to happen with that backfield? Because that has been pretty split on usage historically for Cliff Kingsbury.
And I want to say I do think it's kind of funny, and I said this, the few hours after the Austin Eckler injury, it's like, we've got these two very specific roles in Dan Quinn's offense where you've got your pass catching running back and then your rushing running back. And I was like, they need to add somebody. And funny enough, like the name that I threw around in base camp, the first name I said was Chase Edmonds because of the connection with Cliff Kingsbury. And they did bring him in, but then it dawned on me. I'm like, wait, they already have a very good pass-catching running back, and his name's Deebo Samuel, and he kind of moonlights as a wide receiver, but they can put him in the backfield, and he can do everything that Austin Eckler did and then some. So do want to see how his role changes. That'll be interesting to watch. Atlanta Falcons at Carolina Panthers. Oh, one last thing I want to say about this matchup, Jeff, and I think you're in agreement with me. Brock Bowers, limited. You're still starting him, right? I don't think there's any reason to get cute and bench Brock Bowers for a Juwan Johnson or a Jake Ferguson or flavor of the week, right? Like you're still starting Brock Bowers.
It's funny. I mean, definitely yes, but it's funny because I think that we always have the excitement about tight end being so deep, and then like feeling that way of like week one, like tight end so deep, but then like George Kittle gets hurt, and I remember looking at tight end week 2 ranks, and it's like, oh well, Tyler Warren's like tight end 4, and then Tucker Kraft like tight end 5, and like after that, it's like, oh, I don't feel good about any of this, like, after that. And so we got there fast in terms
Yeah.
of tight end is not deep again,
Tight end
despite
felt deep when we forgot about TJ Hawkinson and Mark Andrews and Travis Kelsey also showing signs of decline last year that we just ignored. And we're like, oh, it's TJ Hawkinson, Mark Andrews, and Travis Kelsey. They're going to be fine. And maybe they can bounce back, but not looking good through the first 2 weeks.
yeah, and Washington needs this game, I think, because if
Yeah.
they're, having that difficult game against the Packers, they do get extra rest days. But you lost, I think one of the underrated things is losing another opportunity for Terry McLaurin and Jaden Daniels to get back on the same page if Jaden Daniels is out after McLaurin missed so much of the preseason.
Falcons at Carolina Panthers. We've got Darnell Mooney limited on Wednesday, practicing in full on Thursday with a shoulder injury, so we expect him to play. Kyle Pitts is limited with a toe injury on Thursday after not being on Wednesday's injury report. So we'll see what happens Friday, but no major cause for concern yet. Xavier Legette dealing with a hamstring injury has been limited throughout the week. And then Hunter Renfrow getting some of that preferential veteran treatment, getting a rest day on Wednesday and then practicing in full on Thursday. Jeff, I don't know if there's any major takeaways from this one. Everyone's relatively healthy. I think these are clean enough offenses that you know who you want to start. Tedero McMillan has looked fantastic. I think Hunter Renfrow now has kind of pushed his way into the desperation flex conversation. And then we know who we're starting in Atlanta as well. Anything that you're going to be watching specifically in this one?
We saw when these teams played last time, I think it was 44-38, just a big barn burner at the end of last year, 5 touchdowns that Bryce Young accounted for, Michael Penix over 300 yards. But then we saw last week, the Falcons really relying on the run game, slowing that game down. I think Carolina would be happy to play a rely on the run game, slow the game down type of a game. Chuba Hubbard has not really taken off in ways that I think that we'd hope, but at the same time, he's looked better in the passing game. He's gotten there with receiving touchdowns the last 2 weeks, but they've talked a lot about splitting that backfield. But then Rico Dowdle doesn't look any better than Chuba Hubbard when given opportunities, so it's not like he ran away with that. I think the biggest thing is seeing the Falcons pass catchers in that passing game get back to health, or is it going to be, are they going to be able to run the ball at will on Carolina and be happy playing that game plan? Because in Drake London, we have not gotten what we were hoping to see out of Drake London when we drafted Drake London, and then Darnell Mooney getting back up to speed. But then on the Panthers side, 8 targets last week for Xavier Legette, 1 catch, -1 yards. And if you watch that game, the Xavier Legette is a huge body language guy. He's going to wear his heart on his sleeve. And when they were making that comeback, everybody's up on the line of scrimmage, and Xavier Legette's kind of lollygagging of that's the type of thing, what's going on here? And did we see a flip? Did we see Hunter Renfrow become that go-to underneath option where Tedero McMillan looking like Mike Evans and looking like he can do so many different things, having a reliable underneath option that opens quickly for Bryce Young, Hunter Renfrow potentially sits within that. And so seeing that develop, or seeing if Jatavian Sanders also had a good game might be that, or I feel like this game, there are so many things in play in terms of it can just be an NFC South complete shootout and everything goes wild, or it can be 13-10 and we're all just kind of sad about everything of this game.
Houston Texans at Jacksonville Jaguars. We've got Christian Kirk, who's been dealing with a hamstring injury, yet to play this year, practicing in a limited fashion and expected to make his return, his season debut with the Houston Texans. Bashal Tutin dealing with a shoulder injury, has been limited in practice, but we expect to see him out there. And then Brian Thomas Jr. has this wrist injury, full participant on Wednesday, but was limited on Thursday. And Jeff, I'm sure you saw this kind of mysteriousness surrounding this wrist injury where Liam Cohen, after the game, said that he had been dealing with a wrist injury for a couple of days that wasn't on the injury report. You kind of saw the panic in his eyes as he was saying something that maybe he shouldn't have been saying in an interview. So do you think that wrist injury played into the alligator arm narrative that we saw from Brian Thomas Jr. in week 2, or do you think that was just them trying to kind of put a square peg in a round hole? I have faith that Liam Cohen is going to watch the film and say, we can't put Brian Thomas Jr. back in that role again. He's more of an outside the numbers boundary type of receiver. He's not somebody who's really catching the ball across the middle through traffic. It was just a weird game plan.
I mean, but don't you kind of need him to be catching the ball over the middle in traffic? If you want him to develop into the number one receiver, I mean, part of growth is putting people into positions that they're uncomfortable with so that they can learn and grow and develop there. I don't know. I don't want to say, I don't want to lean on like the vibes feel off, but like it doesn't feel like between Cohen, between Trevor Lawrence, between Brian Thomas, like everything is kumbaya right now in Jacksonville.
Yeah.
I get the feeling
Oh,
that
you saw the brush off where like Cohen was talking to him on the sidelines and he kind of like threw his hand like, yeah, not good after 2 weeks.
yeah, and I mean that happened, the heat of the moment, like that happens. I don't assign a ton to it, but Liam Cohen seems like kind of an awkward guy, and I think that um, he picked up a lot of the pieces that Dave Canales put in place for Tampa, and he was only there for a year, and we've seen when these coaches run into tough spots, I feel like it does tend to be that type of situation where a guy like kind of rockets into a position and maybe he's not exactly ready for that position and the team sniffs it out pretty quickly. I hesitate to say the vibes are bad, but the vibes are bad, I feel like, in Jacksonville.
Yeah, we'll see how this one plays out. And I do think that, back to what you were saying about like Brian Thomas Jr. not being in a role that he was supposed to be in, but trying to hope that he can grow into something differently. I think last week too, with the game plan being that Travis Hunter was going to play more on defense, that role, a lot of the routes that we saw Brian Thomas Jr. running, I think would typically be reserved for Travis Hunter. But with him just being like a 60% offensive player, they had to put Brian Thomas Jr. in roles that he isn't really made for. So again, like I want to have faith in Liam Cohen to look at the film and figure this out, but not crazy with the utilization that we saw in week 2. Let's go to the late slate of games here. Denver Broncos in Los Angeles playing against the Chargers in what is going to be a great AFC West matchup. Really excited about this one here. Evan Ingram has not practiced this week, dealing with a back injury. We got word from Sean Payton saying that RJ Harvey is quote unquote an important piece of the offense. We'll see if he uses him that way. Ladd McConkey, there was a fear on Wednesday when he missed practice with a biceps injury, but he was back to a full participation on Thursday, so we expect to see him play. And then Will Dissly, dealing with a knee issue, has yet to practice this week. Jeff, a big talking point here is going to be Pat Surtain, who has just shut down every single corner or wide receiver that he's gone up against so far this year. Do you think that he shadows Quentin Johnston? Does he shadow Ladd McConkey? Does he move around a little bit and see some of these guys? What is your takeaway here? Because I think this is probably the biggest talking point. This Chargers passing attack has been red hot, but do you think that Pat Surtain could potentially slow it down?
I want to dig into this a little bit, probably. This is where maybe my ignorance comes into play, and admittedly that. Has Surtain been just 100% shadow through the first 2 weeks, or has he been moving around? I wish I knew more.
He's moved around a little bit, and he always is going to play out wide. He's never going to drop down into that nickel slot position. So what I have said is that I'm tempering expectations slightly for Quentin Johnston and Ladd McConkey, but I am like wheels up for Keenan Allen in this matchup because if Pat Surtain is going to be covering that first read on you, figure let's just say 50% of the snaps, even if it's switching between the two receivers, the one guy he's not going to be covering is Keenan Allen out of the slot. So I'm expecting a big game from Keenan Allen here. Still starting Ladd McConkey, still starting Quentin Johnston in my flex where I've got him, but I've got Keenan Allen a very, very aggressive ranking this week.
Yeah, because I think the argument is you could put Johnston on one side, and if Surtain's just going to go there with him, like, well, that's fine. We're going to pick on your other corners here with Ladd McConkey and Keenan Allen on the other side of the field. And, if you're going to have a clear out game for Johnston and you just run downfield, take Patrick Surtain out of it if he's going to be out of it anyways. But I think that's probably the one argument. The other argument is if they're picking you apart on the one side, then maybe you want to force them to go to Quentin Johnston and you put Surtain on the other corners or on the other receivers. So I think there's both sides of the argument there, but we've seen, I mean, there's people have pushback on you can't have three receivers in an offense, and if you're not throwing it to the tight end and you're not throwing it to the running back, you can absolutely have three receivers in an offense. We've seen it historically, no problem. Multiple offenses that are hyper focused just to the receivers. And Sean McVay offense for a number of years when they had Robert Woods and Brandon Cooks and Cooper Kupp and working Sammy Watkins there for a little bit. I think that these receivers are so good and Justin Herbert is so good. I mean, this certainly is the most difficult matchup that they're probably going to see all year long, and they're going to see it again. But Kansas City should be a pretty difficult matchup, and they
Mm.
kind of carved that one up. So it's an interesting spot here. And then I think on the Broncos side, I know there's talk about.
Real quick, I just want to say you talk about like you can't have three receivers, but you can if you're not targeting the tight ends and you're not targeting the running backs. You know what else helps? When you got a quarterback pacing for 4,800 yards.
Yeah. Yeah, when you've got one of the best guys in the league playing quarterback,
Right.
that helps too. I think on the Broncos side, I talked about my backfield piece this week about how RJ Harvey, he had the 50-yard run, but if you take out the 50-yard run, everything's been bad, but he's still capable of the 50-yard run. So it's
Right.
like the catch-22 there of it's not fair to play it with one player if you're not going to play it with every player. But and this has been J.K. Dobbins' backfield, and I don't think that's should be too much of a shock, because Dobbins is a very productive player when he's been able to be healthy. The big question with him is how long can he stay healthy? A revenge spot here for J.K. Dobbins going up against the Chargers team from last year, and they put that tag on him that kind of killed his free agency a little bit, made things difficult for him in free agency, and he finally was able to sign with Denver. Be curious to see if there's a little bit of extra motivation on there. And I think the biggest thing that I want to see from the Broncos is Troy Franklin, whether or not that's for real, because that was a preseason drumbeat that he had kind of stepped into the wide receiver 2 role. And I think when you look at skill set, he kind of fits that Mike Thomas, slant king type of a skill set to be able to give him the ball and create afterwards. I think there's a narrative about him that he's more of just a vertical burner, and that's not really his game. And so I think that you've got to be the way that Pat Bryant was being drafted, the way that Marvin Mims was being drafted, the way that Evan Ingram was being drafted. All of those are disappointing pieces. This should be a defensive first matchup, but then at the same time, you thought last week should have been a defensive first matchup, and you saw Daniel Jones get off against this Broncos defense. So it'll be interesting.
Yeah, and I mentioned it on a show yesterday, but Troy Franklin came into the league young. He was just turned 21 years old when he was drafted, and you just look at him from last year to this year. Looks like he's bulked up. Like you could see, his frame is a little bit thicker, his arms are a little bit bigger. So I think that's why you didn't see a lot of the across the middle of the field stuff last year. But you've got to be strong and you need to be aggressive in that role. And I think that now that he's bulked up a little bit, they do have faith to put him in that. And I'm so glad you said it, because I've said the Michael Thomas role on a handful of shows this week, and it sounds so overreactionary, but we did see him just running those slants, catching them in stride, making plays after the catch, and we know how valuable that role can be. So I think that we can see Franklin facilitating that role while Courtland Sutton does what he does best outside the numbers, making these acrobatic catches downfield. And I think, I don't know if there's a player I'm going to be watching closer this week. As soon as this game is over, I'm going to be going to the all 22 and seeing if this is real or fake, because Troy Franklin, if he does get that role, we can knock the draft capital, all these other things, but that is a very valuable role, as we have seen in the past.
Yeah, he's a guy the draft capital, there was some off the field professionalism concerns that maybe played into that draft capital a little bit, and that's what we kind of see with some of these guys that do put it together. Is there's an issue, because I think on talent alone, Franklin was probably a first round caliber player.
I talk about this all the time. You look at all of the day 3 wide receivers that have smashed: Antonio Brown, Tyreek Hill, Stephon Diggs. They didn't fall because of their talent. They fell for other reasons. And if anybody's got some free time, I'll let you have some fun and do some digging on that later today. New Orleans Saints at Seattle Seahawks. Devon Vele dealing with a hip injury, was limited on Thursday. No huge concern there. Zach Charbonnet, however, has yet to practice this week, dealing with a foot issue. And then Torrey Horton has been limited with a groin injury. So, Jeff, how quickly we talk about overreaction to week 1 and then overreaction to week 2. I mean, week 1, Ken Walker was just droppable. And then after week 2, now all of a sudden Ken Walker is Ken Walker again. And now we've got Zach Charbonnet injured. I mean, if Zach Charbonnet has to miss any time, we're putting Ken Walker, in the top 12, top 15?
Oh, yeah, definitely. I mean, the proverbial wheels up on Walker with Zach Charbonnet out of the lineup, but it is kind of...
I want to say it's not officially out of the lineup yet, but seems to be trending in that direction.
If it breaks that way, but whether or not we see more involvement from Cooper Kupp, or if it goes back to that week 1 from Dexton Smith and Jigba just being the only receiver, that's, I think, going to be the biggest thing to watch here. And whether or not Spencer Rattler can keep this offense rolling. I mean, they're losing games, but they are accruing fantasy points for all the players that you want. But this Seahawks defense is legitimate, and I think it's going to be a tough spot for Rattler.
Dallas Cowboys going to Chicago to face against the Bears, and this is a pretty healthy lineup. So over under at this one currently sitting at 51.5. A lot of people are expecting a shootout here. Cavante Turpin dealing with a neck issue that knocked him out of last week's game, but he was able to log a full practice on Thursday, so seems like he is going to play. And then DeAndre Swift has been limited with a quad injury, but there's no indications that he won't be ready to go. Jeff, I think this is just like a fire every single cannon here. You got the deep plays if you're looking way down to like Cavante Turpin as a potential flex play. I think Jake Ferguson, you're firing him up with confidence. George Pickens and CeeDee Lamb, no question. And then on the Bears side of the ball, they've got a lot of weapons as well. This is a game where I expect a lot of scoring here. If this game scores 6, 7, 8 touchdowns, wouldn't surprise me one bit. Is that kind of your read on this one as well?
Yeah, it's hard not to have that read after what we saw last week. The just neither defense is any good at all. But then I do feel like doing the DFS show, it seems like we have these circle matchups that we want to play every single piece of, and more often than not, they turn into the 13-10 ugly games. But we're hoping that we get a back and forth here. I think on the Bears side, just seeing Rome Odunze blossoming as that number one receiver. Another thing we talked about on the show last night was how long is DJ Moore for this Bears team, because I think there's been so much talk about Luther Burden and him being a zero, and when does he replace Olamide Zaccheaus? And the question might be,
replacing DJ Moore.
When does he replace DJ Moore at this point? Because it's just that you're not seeing it with DJ Moore. You're playing him given this matchup, but it makes you probably nervous. And from what you've seen so far, but whether or not Williams can take a step forward the way that we saw Russell Wilson just shred this Dallas defense, and you want to see, George Pickens got the touchdown last week. You want to see CeeDee Lamb get into the end zone. CeeDee Lamb has 4 consecutive 100-yard games. And so Michael Irving has the Cowboys record with 7 consecutive 100-yard games. And I think it's Calvin Johnson and Adam Thielen have the NFL record doing 8 consecutive 100-yard games. This definitely feels like a spot where CeeDee Lamb should be adding his 5th 100-yard game.
Let me ask you a question, Jeff. Maybe I need a heat check here. It's been a pretty lukewarm show so far, so I'll throw a scalding hot take in your direction. I've got Troy Franklin, who we just talked about, ahead of DJ Moore in my week 3 rankings. Am I being crazy with that one?
The matchups are just the biggest thing there, because I think the Chargers do present a potential difficult matchup for Franklin, and again, like it's really hard
that's another potential
ignore
shootout. They might be in a position where they're forced to throw, and that's kind of my read here, is that they might be down in the second half and forced to throw the ball a lot. So I don't know. Again, like, I know this is a very anti-consensus take, but I'm a little bit lower on DJ Moore and a little bit higher on Troy Franklin than I think most are this week.
I think it goes back to our friend Chris Harris, what he always says when it comes down to that, of like, what can you live with in your lineup? And if you're going to be sitting there kicking yourself when Dallas and Chicago is playing a 51-48 barn burner, and DJ Moore has 150 yards, and Troy Franklin's got 4 receptions for 30 yards, and you're like, what did I do with my life here? I think that's where that decision comes down.
Yeah, perfect timing. I don't know who is running the Football Guys Twitter account. We got a handful of people that kind of have their hands in there, but shared a graphic of one of my Rome Odunze rankings from this week, and they said Odunze's in a smash spot against Dallas this weekend. So in classic fantasy football fashion, we're expecting 7.3 PPR points. Because that's just the way that this goes. Arizona Cardinals at San Francisco 49ers. This is the last matchup of the late slate of games. All the Cardinals players are healthy that we care about, so that's good to hear. Juwan Jennings did not practice so far this week with an ankle and a shoulder injury. Christian McCaffrey did not practice Wednesday. They're just calling it calf/rest. I like that they put that in the injury report. Hey, guys, no concern here. It's not his calf. We're also just, rest. I think we're going to see a lot of that this season. Brock Purdy limited. Still have yet to see whether he's going to play or not. So this could be Brock Purdy back in the lineup, could be Mac Jones. We don't really know yet. But Jeff, if Juwan Jennings can't play, and if Brock Purdy is out there, we saw what week 1 looked like with Ricky Pearsall. I'd imagine he moves like back up into must-start territory if that's how the cards fall, right?
Yeah, you would think so. Going against the Cards, that they've just been brutalized at the cornerback position. I think they're down maybe like 5 of their top 6 cornerbacks. And so, but then like Pearsall, we saw the 100-yard game from week 1. We saw a disappointing week last week, I think, relative to expectations. you want to see him put it together consistently. But I mean, if Jennings is out of the lineup, you're down to Pearsall and Christian McCaffrey is what you have in this offense, probably outside of just random like Marcus Valdez-Scantling catching a random 60-yard touchdown or something like that. But you would have to think the volume would flow through those two players.
So going to move on to Sunday Night Football. And a lot of these we've been kind of moving through quickly because there haven't been a lot of injuries. But Kansas City Chiefs, New York Giants, a lot of fantasy relevant injuries here. Xavier Worthy dealing with a shoulder injury, but he has been limited in practice. Sounds
Does he
like he
still look like
might
a
be able
mummy?
to play. No, that's shocking. Like his arm is not wrapped up. It looks like he has full mobility. Jeff, if there's one injury that I feel like I'm an expert on, it's a torn labrum because I suffered this myself, and I can tell you it is extremely painful. And what happens is like the wrong movement can cause a subluxation where it kind of pops out, pops back in on its own. It's also really easy to re-injure. Like I had been going through physical therapy and healing my torn labrum, and then I fell and I re-injured it, which actually caused a second tear, which caused surgery, which put me on ice for about 6 months. So what it is, like, he can play through it, and we see players play through torn labrums often, but the re-injury risk is sky high. So I think that's the fear here, is that he's going to play through this. He should be fine, but he takes one bad hit or he falls a little bit awkwardly, and then his season is over. So I think there's a ton of risk putting Xavier Worthy out there, but I think it's kind of desperation. Like they don't have anybody else and they kind of need him. This receiver core is just terrible without Xavier Worthy out there. So I almost wonder if they're kind of rushing him back earlier than they should.
Well, they're 0-2. And I wonder
Yeah.
if it's the, that disappointing loss, that tough game against the Eagles last week. Meanwhile, you see Russell Wilson thrown for 450 yards and lighting it up with those receivers.
Yeah.
And you're kind of saying, well, before the season, you had a slam dunk win on this, but also you thought you would be 1-1 at least, opening with the Chargers and the Eagles. They've got the Ravens next week. And to say it's a must-win game for a Patrick Mahomes and an Andy Reid team in week 3 feels maybe a little bit aggressive, but it's a must-win game for an Andy Reid and a Patrick Mahomes team because the Chargers have looked so good at 2-0 and going up against Denver. So you know either the Chargers are going to be 3-0 or the Broncos and Chargers are both going to be 2-1, and you have to beat the Giants, otherwise you're in an 0-3 hole going up against the Ravens. I mean, it's the idea of, I think it's funny. I asked Grok on Twitter this summer of like, we were just kind of talking and throughout Grok's hot take was that the Chiefs missed the playoffs. And I was like, oh, you crazy robot. What are you talking about? And then maybe he's going to be right because that is a difficult schedule. They have got the Ravens. They've got the Lions coming up. They've got Buffalo still coming up. They 2 games against the Broncos, another game against the Chargers. I mean, to me, it looks like best case 10-7 right now. And I think last year we saw that great record, but how many of those games, we know how many of those games came down to the very, very end, and your luck flips a
9,
little
I want
bit.
to say.
Yeah, I
9
mean,
were within like 3 points.
your luck flips a little bit, and if you lose all those games, then you're looking at a 9-8 or type of thing where you're doing some math in week 18 or whether you can slide in past the inevitable Steelers 9-8 record.
So we've got some other injuries here to deal with as well. Marquise Brown, ankle injury. He's practicing in full, so we expect to see him out there. Jalen Royals was limited Wednesday with a knee injury, but he practiced in full on Friday. Or I'm sorry, on Thursday. Patrick Mahomes practicing in full. They're calling it a right wrist injury, so making a point to say that it is on his throwing hand. Jeff, and this isn't injury related, but we do our deep sleeper of the week on the show that I do with Alfredo Brown. And I talked about Tyquan Thornton and getting a little bit of pushback for that one here. I think that he kind of is the guy that could unlock the deep ball that we've talked about for years that we've needed to see in this Chiefs offense. We know that they're pretty content to put Xavier Worthy in that short ADOT yard after the catch type of role like we saw over the second half of last year. Meanwhile, Tyquan Thornton right now is averaging a 31-yard average depth of target. His total air yards are making up 48% of the air yards for the Kansas City Chiefs. I mean, it's a desperation play for sure, but I would much rather take, the chance that Tyquan Thornton has 2 catches for 85 yards and a touchdown over a Marquise Brown, who, what are we hoping from him? Like 4 catches for 22 scoreless yards?
That's an interesting position to land on, because with if Xavier Worthy's back in the lineup, I would have to think Hollywood Brown is going to be the receiver opposite him. And do they have, is Tyquan Thornton there on the field, or is it Juju Smith-Schuster on the field? Is it going to be Jalen Royals getting some time? Do they go
I think
play two
Thornton's
tight
looked like
ends?
the better receiver. I think Thornton's looked better than Marquise Brown. Marquise Brown, I don't know if it's the injuries piling up, but like he looks like he's lost a step. He does not have that speed. And we got to remember Tyquan Thornton was a 4.28 guy coming out of college, a second round pick that just never really found his footing in New England. But in my opinion, my very amateur film grinding opinion, I think Tyquan Thornton has looked great through these first couple of weeks.
I think Hollywood Brown looked better than people were thinking in week one. I think it was the surprise of seeing him in the Wan'Dale Robinson role, but then at the same time, he did hit a deep pass later in that game to bump his yardage up there close to 100. I mean, we saw, I think a lot of it's, reaction to reactions. And I think the reaction going into last week was to move Hollywood Brown way up because of the volume that we saw in week one. And then we got a disappointing game in week two against what is a good Philadelphia defense, and Quinyon Mitchell being out there at corner. I mean, that's a difficult matchup for somebody that doesn't have anybody else to provide them any cover or support. I worry on going to Tyquan Thornton over Marquise Brown, that you just run into a situation that if Xavier Worthy is available on the field, you're just not seeing Tyquan Thornton on the field. You're seeing Xavier Worthy doing his thing and Hollywood Brown kind of as a complimentary piece on there. But I don't know that if you're talking about starting either of these guys right now, unless it's the very deepest of leagues, I feel like you feel in trouble anyways. But
Jeff, you know the leagues that we play in, man. I'm firing up Olamide Zaccheaus and Xavier Scott in a bunch of dynasty leagues because these are the types of leagues that you and I enjoy. But all right, we'll add a second one here. We got our Quinshon Judkins 10.8 PPR points, and now we've also got Tyquan Thornton over Marquise Brown in the matchup that probably doesn't matter for 99.9% of fantasy football managers. New York Giants, we've got Wan'Dale Robinson dealing with a foot injury. He's been limited, but no concern there. Also got to say, I don't know if there's a person in the world that Russell Wilson loves more than Wan'Dale Robinson. If you've heard any of the comments that he has made about him, like comping him to Tyler Lockett, just singing his praises, I think that what we've seen through these first couple of weeks is very much so for real. Darius Slayton, groin and a calf injury, he's been limited. Tyrone Tracy dealing with a calf injury, he has been limited. Cam Scadaboo, ankle injury, practicing in full. So a lot of guys banged up here, but it seems like everybody is trending to play. We talked about Tyrone Tracy and Cam Scadaboo quite a bit on a show earlier this week. I don't really know what to make of this backfield. I am kind of taking just a hands-off break class in case of emergency situation. And of course, in deep leagues, you can't really afford to do that. You got to stake a claim on one of these guys, but I've got him back to back in my rankings with Cam Scadaboo one spot ahead of Tyrone Tracy, but I don't know what to make of this backfield. And I'm kind of nervous going forward.
I mean, all of these guys are dealing with injuries that would probably leave me in bed for a week. So with a massive grain of salt, but remember last year when Brian Robinson definitely did not get benched. He was hurt. I do feel like sometimes we run into these situations where a guy's definitely not benched. He is hurt. And it provides a little bit of a cover for a guy that might be getting benched and gets, I don't know. I'm not saying that Tyrone Tracy's not hurt. But it's a convenient time for an injury, probably for Tyrone Tracy, given the comments and the questioning, and then looking like maybe Cam Scadaboo took that job over the second half of the game last week.
Yeah, and also, shout out Steffi Smalls, our good friend who pays very close attention to the New York Giants. She pointed out to me, which I didn't, it kind of slipped through the cracks in the mayhem of the season. I didn't realize after week one that Tyrone Tracy made some very critical comments about the game planning and the coaching. So you got to wonder, Cam Scadaboo out here, just a team player through and through, getting guys hyped on the sideline, headbutting dudes and doing all the things that coaches love. And then Tyrone Tracy going to the media questioning Brian Daboll's game planning. I mean, you're looking at two extremes here for what coaches want to see and what coaches don't want to see.
Yeah, and Russell Wilson was my biggest miss last week. I had him as my quarterback 32. I thought that there was a chance that he would be benched in the middle of that Cowboys game. I was way wrong about how bad the Cowboys defense was, and I besmirched the name of Russell Wilson, and really just kind of have to own that. That was a big mess up on my end. I had do a Friday article where I kind of look at some stats, and I had suggested that Joe Flacco is not that far behind Russell Wilson in career passing yardage, and if Russell Wilson gets benched and Joe Flacco could potentially pass him. And now it looks like Joe Flacco is the guy that's potentially going to get benched for the rookie. And Russell Wilson, it looks like he, at least for a week, has fought off the Jackson Dart rumors. And you feel like he's going to, but again, difficult matchup against the Chiefs.
One last thing I'm going to say about this matchup against the Chiefs, and this is for you Dynasty sickos out there. Clyde Edwards-Helaire re-signed with the team, and Kareem Hunt is Kareem Hunt. Isaiah Pacheco has not looked good, and I know Clyde Edwards-Helaire has not looked good either, but they clearly don't like what they've seen from Isaiah Pacheco, and they said that like what they're seeing in the game is not what they're seeing in the practice field. So for your super, super deep leagues out there, Clyde Edwards-Helaire, back on the menu, worth a stash in your deep leagues.
Part of me, yes. And I saw the comments about they're seeing it in practice, but it hasn't translated to the game. To me, makes me wonder if you're not going to pile it on Pacheco a little bit of like, maybe you need to admit that you're giving the guy like 5 rushes or something, like how you're expecting a running back to get in any sort of rhythm with like 10 total carries or 5 rushes. Like, do you maybe say, hey, we need to get it going. We see what you do in practice. Let's really give it to you this week and see if you can put it together here. But you're exactly right. If that does happen and it doesn't get put together, then we need to look at other options.
Detroit Lions at Baltimore Ravens for the Monday Night Football Championship. And thank goodness we got some bad primetime games last week. This is what I want to see, like a potential, Jeff, I know you don't want to hear this as a Bills fan, but maybe a preview of this year's Super Bowl. I mean, just 2 of the best teams in each conference. Really excited about this one. Lions players are healthy, everybody that we care about for fantasy purposes. For the Baltimore Ravens, Isaiah Likely got a limited practice in on Thursday. We got to remember these Monday Night Football players, they don't practice on Wednesday, so we've only got one data point to work with here, but Isaiah Likely limited. He might be able to make his debut. We'll see if he can come back or not, but no real injuries to talk about here. So let's just close the show on what you're going to be watching in this matchup, Jeff. I'm very excited for this one. I'm just going to be watching all of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the biggest thing probably for the Lions side is outdoor Jared Goff going against what is a strong secondary. Is what we saw last week against the Bears legitimate, or are we going to be back in the position of where we were week 1, just full-blown panic of Ben Johnson's gone and Jared Goff can't do this? I think that's going to be the interesting side from the Lions side. I'd like to see Jameson Williams, our guy of the show, get a little bit more involved. We saw some big plays last week, but the volume has not been there through 2 weeks. I mean, the Ravens side, everybody's telling me that the Ravens are the best team in the AFC. I see a 1 and a 1 next to their name. Sure, that the very best team in the AFC that just lost for the second time in 4 games to or 3 games to another team. But okay, yeah, I mean the best team in the AFC, of course. And Lamar Jackson's the best quarterback in the AFC, but he's lost 2 of the last 3 games to Josh Allen. But okay, I hear you. Sure, all right.
Jeff, there's something behind you on that wall there. What is that I'm seeing there? I think it might
the
be
only 3-0 team in the league, Dave. I think the team that has beaten the Baltimore Ravens in 2 of the Ravens' last 3 games. The reigning NFL MVP. Saw him hit 3 touchdowns in primetime as they win another game and winning 10 consecutive games at home. But sure.
Must be nice to be a fan of a team that wins football games. I'd love to be a part of that.
I had 20 years, man. But I was waiting 20 years for it. So I'm going to enjoy every moment. I just would like to see them crack through once, and maybe Gronk will be right, and Patrick Mahomes won't be standing there in the playoffs this year.
Well, that'll do it for today's show. We do this every Friday, go through all of the matchups, talking about injuries, news, and notes from every team around the league. This is the last show that we'll be doing on this channel for this week, but every Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday, you can find episodes right here on the Football Guys Dynasty Show feed, whether you're listening on YouTube, podcasts, or wherever you listen to this. So I want to thank y'all so much for tuning in. Best of luck this week, and we will see you next Wednesday.